Before Abraham Lincoln belonged to marble statues, school books, solemn speeches, and the long memory of a nation. He belonged to a very small light. It was the kind of light that trembled in a cabin at night, a candle flame leaning whenever the air moved through the cracks, or a low fire in the hearth glowing just brightly enough for a boy to see the words on a borrowed page. Outside, the trees were dark, the road was rough, the world was wide and difficult, but inside that little circle of light, a thin, serious boy was reading slowly, carefully, as if every sentence were a door, and he had been given only a few quiet hours before morning to open as many doors as he could. Tonight, we are going to follow that boy very gently, not in a hurried way, not as a list of dates to memorize, and not as a loud story of power, conflict, and monuments. We are going to walk beside him slowly, from the wooden cabin of his childhood to the lamplit rooms where he wrote, waited, worried, and carried the sorrow of a divided country. We will see the hard ground beneath his feet, the books in his hands, the grief he endured, the humor that kept him human, and the strange, steady kindness that remained in him, even when history placed a heavy burden on his shoulders. Settle yourself softly now. Let your body know that you are safe. The storms of Lincoln's century are far away. The cabins, muddy roads, crowded courtrooms, distant battlefields, and candlelit offices we will visit tonight cannot harm you. They are part of memory now. Softened by time, you do not need to solve the past. You do not need to hold every date. You can simply listen, as though this story were being told beside a low fire, with the night deep outside and the voice in the room slow enough to let your thoughts loosen. Imagine, then, a winter dark cabin in the early 19th century. The walls are made of logs, rough and close together, with chinks sealed by clay, wood chips, moss, and whatever material the family can find. The floor may be packed earth or rough boards. There is very little furniture. There are tools, a bed, blankets, perhaps a table, perhaps a few dishes, and the smell of wood smoke that never fully leaves the room. This is not the kind of childhood home that promises comfort. It promises work. It promises weather. It promises that every small improvement must be made by hand. And yet, in that cabin, there is a boy with a hunger that poverty cannot quite starve. He wants to know. He wants to understand. He wants to enter the larger world through words. His family has little money. Books are rare. School is brief and irregular. But the boy reads whenever he can. He reads by firelight. He reads when his body is tired from chores. He reads slowly because the words matter. He reads as though language itself might be a ladder leaning quietly against the wall. This boy is Abraham Lincoln. He was born on February 12th, 1909, in Kentucky, in a world of farms, forests, cabins, rough roads, and uncertain futures. His family was poor. His father, Thomas Lincoln, worked the land with his hands. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, was remembered as gentle and thoughtful, a woman whose tenderness left deep marks on the child who loved her. Abraham also had an older sister named Sarah, and in those early years the family's life was simple, demanding, and close to the edge of need. In a place like that, childhood did not mean long years of play protected from responsibility. Abraham carried water, he gathered wood, he helped with animals, he watched adults work until their bodies were tired and their hands were rough. The seasons shaped each day. In cold weather, the fire had to be fed. In warm weather, fields demanded attention. Food, clothing, shelter, and warmth came from labor. A child learned early that survival was not an idea. It was a set of tasks repeated until they became part of the body. There was another kind of work happening inside him. While his hands learned the weight of an axe and the feel of rough wood, his mind learned the weight of words. Nancy, his mother, encouraged kindness and honesty. She gave him not wealth, but a moral direction. She helped him understand that a person's value was not measured by how much land they owned or how fine their clothing was, but by how they treated others, how they spoke the truth, and how they carried themselves when life was hard. Let that image rest for a moment. A mother in a small cabin, a child listening, the fire low, the world outside broad and uncertain. No one there can see the future. No one knows that the boy absorbing those quiet lessons will one day stand before a wounded nation and speak of liberty, equality, and a new birth of freedom. At the time, it is only a mother teaching a child, yet history is often built from such small beginnings. The early landscape around Lincoln was not gentle in the modern sense. The forest was not a park. It was shelter, fuel, obstacle, danger, and possibility all at once. The trees had to be cut for cabins and fences. The land had to be cleared for planting. Paths had to be made by use. Mud held the feet. Winter entered through cracks. Summer brought heat, insects, and labor. The world did not arrange itself for comfort. People made what comfort they could. Still, the cabin had its rhythms. Morning light entering slowly, smoke rising from the hearth, the scrape of tools, the sound of a bucket, the dull thud of wood being split, a pot warming, a voice speaking from the other side of the room. In the evening, when work slowed and darkness gathered, the same small interior could become a place of listening. Someone might tell a story. Someone might mend. Someone might sit close to the fire, and a boy might reach for a book as if reaching for a distant country. When Abraham was still young, the family moved from Kentucky to Indiana. Moving in those days was not a simple change of address. It meant leaving known ground, traveling through forest and rough country, crossing rivers, carrying what could be carried, and beginning again. The new home in Indiana was another cabin, another hard start, another attempt to make a life from land and labor. The forest was thick, the work was heavy, trees had to be cut, ground had to be cleared, shelter had to be strengthened against weather. For a child, such a place could be lonely and vast. The woods were not only scenery, they were work, fuel, danger, and possibility. The sound of an axe carried through the trees. Smoke rose from cabins scattered far apart. Neighbors could live at a distance that required real effort to cross. If a book existed in one house, borrowing it might mean walking miles. If a school opened nearby, attendance might depend on weather, work, and the family's needs. Learning was not offered smoothly. It had to be sought in Indiana. The days had a kind of rough repetition. Wake early, work, eat what could be provided. Work again, watch the sky, keep tools ready. Carry wood, repair what broke. Listen to adults speak of land, weather, debts, illness, and neighbors. At night, the world narrowed to the cabin outside. The forest held its own darkness. Inside, the small flame made a room of safety. It is easy to imagine young Abraham looking from the fire to a page, then back again, learning both light and language at the same time. Then, when Abraham was 9 years old, sorrow entered the cabin. His mother became sick with what was known as milk sickness, a dangerous illness that struck frontier communities. There was little that could be done. The boy watched the woman who had been a source of tenderness grow weaker. And then Nancy died. Abraham was still a child, and the loss settled into him deeply. We will not linger harshly here. This is a bedtime history, and grief can be acknowledged without being made sharp. Let it be seen from a distance, like a dark tree line beyond a field. The child lost his mother. The cabin changed. The air inside it must have felt different. Her voice was gone. Her hands were gone. But the lessons she gave him did not disappear. Kindness and honesty stayed, not as simple words, but as a quiet inheritance. After his mother's death, the household grew more difficult. Grief does not stop wood from needing to be cut or food from needing to be prepared. Children still need care. Winter still comes. Thomas Lincoln could not manage everything alone. And after a time, he remarried. Sarah Bush Johnston entered Abraham's life, bringing her own children and her own strong, practical kindness. She became Abraham's stepmother, but in his life, she was much more than a figure added to the household. Sarah saw the boy's mind. She saw that he loved books. She encouraged him. She brought more order, tenderness, and warmth into the home. She gave him support at a time when support mattered greatly. The story of Lincoln's stepmother is one of the softest and most important turns in his early life. Grief did not have the last word. Another form of care entered through another door. Sarah did not erase the loss of Nancy. No one could, but she helped Abraham continue. She protected, as much as she could, the part of him that wanted to learn. And sometimes that is enough to change a life. One adult noticing that a child's hunger for knowledge should not be treated as foolishness. One adult saying, in actions more than speeches, that this child's mind is worth tending. Let us return to safety for a breath. You are not in that cabin. You do not need to feel the full weight of that loss. You are listening from far away, where the grief has become part of a larger pattern. The mother's kindness, the stepmother's encouragement, the boy's hunger to learn. These are the gentle lights we carry forward. Now the story becomes very quiet and very important. Abraham's formal schooling was brief, perhaps less than a year altogether when counted in full. The schools he attended were simple, often called blab schools, where children recited lessons aloud. There were no elegant classrooms, no long shelves of books, no easy path from student to profession. But Abraham did not stop learning simply because school was scarce. He became, in the deepest sense, self-taught. He borrowed books from neighbors. He walked long distances to get them. He read the Bible. He read stories of George Washington. He read books of history, grammar, mathematics, and law when he could find them. He read slowly and intensely, not skimming for quick answers, but turning ideas over in his mind until he understood them. If he found a passage worth remembering, he copied it. If he had no paper, he wrote on boards or on the back of a wooden shovel or scratched words in dust. Paper was precious. Thought had to find other surfaces. Imagine him at night, after work. The body is tired. The hands are rough. The cabin is dim. Others may already be sleeping or speaking softly. He bends toward the light, long legs folded awkwardly, book open, lips perhaps moving as he follows the words. A borrowed book must be returned, so he reads with care. He cannot own the world in objects, but he can gather it inward through language. This is one of the most sleep-friendly parts of Lincoln's life, because it moves in a slow, repeating loop. It all work, read, think, work, read, think, borrow a book, walk home, open it under low light, copy a sentence, ask what it means, carry the idea into the next day. There is no rush here, only persistence. The greatness is not sudden. It is built like a cabin, One log, one notch, one patient adjustment at a time. Sometimes he read aloud, sometimes he repeated phrases until they settled in memory. Sometimes he told others what he had learned, translating the book into speech, testing whether an idea could live outside the page. This matters because Lincoln did not become merely a collector of facts. He became a maker of meaning. He wanted to understand deeply enough to explain simply. That ability would later become one of his greatest strengths. Books were not plentiful, so each one mattered. A biography could feel like a visitor from another world. A book of grammar could become a tool for building clearer thought. A law book could become a map into a profession. The Bible, with its cadences and moral gravity, helped shape the rhythms of Lincoln's later language. He absorbed not only ideas, but the sound of seriousness, the weight of a sentence that could carry sorrow and hope at the same time. There is a lullaby inside this repetition. Read, copy, think. Read, copy, think. A mind building itself quietly. A candle burning down. A young body tired but attentive. Let that rhythm move slowly through the story. Read, think, work, walk, learn, listen, remember, speak. Lincoln also learned the power of stories. He remembered jokes, parables, and anecdotes. He listened closely to how people spoke in a world where entertainment was often oral and communal. A good storyteller mattered. Stories made hard evenings lighter. Stories helped people remember ideas. Stories turned abstract truths into images. Abraham discovered that words could warm a room, change a mood, and make complicated things plain. This skill would remain with him all his life, later in law offices and political meetings, in debates and conversations. He would use stories not merely to entertain, but to open minds. His humor was often earthy, simple, and human. It kept him connected to ordinary people. It also helped him carry sorrow. A person who can laugh gently at himself can survive certain kinds of pain with a little more grace. As he grew, Abraham became unusually tall, eventually reaching more than 6 feet 4 inches. He was thin, long-limbed, and strong from physical labor. His appearance was often remarked upon, sometimes kindly, sometimes not. He did not look polished or aristocratic. His clothes were plain. His body seemed shaped by work rather than refinement. But over time, even this became part of his power. He did not appear distant from common people. He looked like someone who had known the same rough roads and hard weather they had known. People sometimes made jokes about his looks. His face was long, his frame awkward, his clothing often ill-fitting. Such things might wound a young person's pride, but Lincoln learned to turn awkwardness into humility and humor. He did not need to appear grand in order to become great. In fact, part of his later appeal came from the sense that he was not pretending to be above anyone. He carried plainness like a form of truth. When Abraham became a young man, work took him beyond the cabin and fields. He split rails for fences, a labor so associated with him later that rail splitter became part of his public image. He worked with his hands, took jobs where he could, and eventually helped take a flatboat down the Mississippi River. The river opened a wider world. It carried him southward through landscapes different from the forests of his youth, toward markets, towns, and the great port city of New Orleans. The Mississippi itself is a powerful image for this part of the story. Wide water, slow current, goods moving, people talking, a young man watching the banks pass by. The river did not simply transport him, it expanded him. It showed him that the country was larger, more complex, and more troubled than the small communities he had known. Picture the flatboat moving downriver. The water is broad and brown. Trees line the banks. At night, the boat may be tied up. the travelers resting under the open sky or near a simple shelter. The sounds are different from the cabin. Water against wood, insects near the shore, distant voices, the creak of rope. For a young man hungry to understand the world, the river was a moving school. In New Orleans, Lincoln saw slavery in a direct and disturbing way. Human beings were bought and sold. Families could be separated. People were treated as property. We do not need to describe this harshly tonight, but we should not soften the moral truth of it. What he saw troubled him. It entered his conscience and remained there. Later stories sometimes frame such moments as instant transformations. Real life is usually slower, but certain sights, once seen, cannot be unseen. They become part of the moral weather inside a person. For Lincoln, the question of slavery would grow in importance over many years. He did not begin as the leader who would end it. He began as a young man learning, watching, feeling the wrongness of a system that denied human freedom. Conscience often awakens quietly. It does not always shout. Sometimes, it simply refuses to go back to sleep. Let us return gently again. The river continues. The difficult sight is behind us now, not forgotten, but held at a distance. We are not staying in the market. We are following the young man back toward the north, toward Illinois, toward law books, courtrooms, and the slow shaping of a public life. The water moves, the boat moves, the story moves, but softly. When Abraham was 22, his family moved again, this time to Illinois. Illinois would become the state most closely associated with his adult life. Here, he began to seek a future shaped less by farm labor and more by the work of the mind. He held various jobs. He worked in a store. He served as a postmaster. He surveyed land. He met people, listened to them, and became known in the community. Slowly, the boy of the cabin became a young man of reputation. The store was a place of talk. People came in not only to buy goods, but to exchange news, tell stories, argue, laugh, complain, and measure one another's character. Lincoln listened. He learned what worried people, what amused them, what they admired, what they feared. In small communities, reputation forms through repeated contact. A person cannot hide forever behind performance. People notice whether you are fair, whether you repay debts, whether your word holds. Lincoln also served as a postmaster, which meant handling letters and newspapers. This seems like a small job, but it placed him near words again. News from elsewhere, political arguments, reports from distant places, personal messages crossing miles. Imagine him sorting letters, reading newspapers when he could, learning the wider currents of the country through ink and folded paper. The boy who loved borrowed books had become a young man still gathering the world through print. He also surveyed land, a job requiring accuracy, patience, and attention to boundaries. Surveying is a quiet metaphor for Lincoln's mind. Measure carefully. Know where one line ends and another begins. Walk the ground. Mark what is real later as a lawyer and politician. He would often try to survey moral and constitutional ground with similar care, even when the landscape was far more difficult than fields and trees. Then he began to study law. He had no money for a formal legal education in the grand sense, but this had never stopped him before. He borrowed law books and read them carefully. Law was a different kind of forest, dense, difficult, full of paths that had to be learned. He studied legal principles, procedures, arguments, and precedents. He asked questions, he observed. He prepared himself until he could pass the necessary examination and become a lawyer. There is something deeply fitting about Lincoln becoming a lawyer. Law, at its best, is society's attempt to turn conflict into reasoned order. It asks people not merely to feel wronged, but to explain, to prove, to argue, to listen. Lincoln's mind was suited to this. He liked clarity. He liked fairness. He liked finding the simple line through a tangled problem. And because he was known for honesty, people trusted him. The name Honest Abe did not come from marble or mythology at first. It came from reputation, from ordinary dealings, from people noticing that he tried to be fair. He was not perfect, because no human being is, but he built a public life on trust, and trust is one of the quietest forms of power. It does not arrive in a single speech. It accumulates through repeated actions, just as warmth accumulates in a room where a fire is carefully tended. As a lawyer, Lincoln traveled the legal circuit in Illinois, moving from town to town to attend court. Imagine the roads, muddy in spring, dusty in summer, frozen in winter. Imagine inns, shared rooms, courtrooms lit by daylight, papers carried in saddlebags, long conversations with other lawyers. These circuit years were not glamorous, but they widened Lincoln's understanding of people. Farmers, merchants, widows, debtors, local officials, quarrelsome neighbors, hopeful young men, tired old ones. The law brought him into contact with human nature in all its ordinary complexity. The legal circuit could be tiring, but it also suited his gifts. He liked company. He liked stories. He liked argument. He liked the challenge of making sense from confusion. At night, after court business ended, lawyers might gather in taverns or simple rooms. There would be jokes, political talk, legal gossip, and long stories. Lincoln often became a center of attention, not by polished elegance, but by the charm of his storytelling and the quickness of his mind. He could bring laughter into a weary room, yet the laughter did not mean he was without sorrow. People who knew Lincoln often sensed melancholy in him. His face could fall into deep sadness when he was not speaking. He carried old griefs and new worries. Humor and sadness lived together in him, and perhaps each made the other more human. The humor kept the sadness from becoming stone. The sadness kept the humor from becoming shallow. He learned to speak plainly. He learned that cleverness alone was not enough. A jury needed to understand. A judge needed to trust. A client needed to feel heard. Lincoln's language became direct, logical, and often gently humorous. He could untangle a case by telling a story that made the point easier to see. He could make people laugh, then guide them towards seriousness. This combination would become one of his greatest gifts. Let the courtroom scene become soft. Daylight through windows, dust in the air, wooden benches, boots on the floor, papers rustling. A tall lawyer rising slowly, perhaps awkwardly, then beginning to speak in a voice that makes the matter clearer. He does not need ornament. He needs truth arranged so ordinary people can see it. This is one of the quiet arts of democracy, making important things understandable. In Springfield, Illinois, Lincoln's adult life took fuller shape. Springfield was the state capital, a place of law, politics, conversation, ambition, and community. There he met Mary Todd, an intelligent and educated woman from a more comfortable background. Mary was lively, politically aware, and socially sharper than Abraham in many ways. Their relationship was not simple. They came from different worlds. They had differences of temperament, yet they were drawn to each other, and in 1842 they married. Their home was not free from sorrow, but it had warmth, noise, and the texture of family life. Abraham and Mary had 4 sons: Robert, Edward, William, and Thomas, called Tad. Lincoln loved his children deeply. He could be indulgent with them, playful, tender. sometimes allowing a kind of disorder that others found surprising. The image of Lincoln as a father softens the public figure. We see him not only as a lawyer or president, but as a man with children, climbing over him, interrupting him, making noise in the rooms where history might otherwise seem too solemn. Imagine the Springfield house in the evening, lamps lit, a desk with papers, Mary's presence strong in the household, children's voices moving from room to room. Abraham, long-legged and tired from work, perhaps telling a story, perhaps letting a child interrupt him, perhaps laughing in the loose way he could laugh when the mood lifted. The house is not a museum yet. It is simply a home, alive with ordinary imperfection. But sorrow came to the family. Edward died as a small child. Later, Willie died during Lincoln's presidency, a loss that devastated both parents. Again, we will not dwell sharply in grief. We will hold it gently, as part of the private chamber inside a public life. Lincoln knew loss early, and he knew it again as a father. This matters because the compassion in him was not abstract. He understood mourning. He understood that human beings carry invisible rooms of sorrow. Let the story pause here beside the Springfield home. The streets are quieter now. A lamp glows in a window. Papers lie on a desk. A child's toy may be somewhere on the floor. Mary's voice might be heard from another room. Abraham, tall and angular, bends over a book or letter. The future is not yet the White House. It is only work, family, law, and the slow call of politics growing louder. Lincoln entered politics because he believed government could improve ordinary life. He served in the Illinois state legislature as a young man. Later, he served one term in the United States Congress. His political ideas developed over time, but certain themes became central. The value of labor, the dignity of ordinary people, the importance of opportunity, the preservation of the Union, and the moral wrong of slavery. Early American politics was intimate, loud, local, and personal. Candidates met voters face to face. Speeches could be long. Newspapers carried arguments. Men gathered to debate policy in public places. Lincoln's skill with words and his reputation for honesty gave him a place in this world. But he also had to endure failure. He lost elections. He faced debt. He experienced disappointment. His rise was not smooth. This is another quiet comfort in his story. We often remember the final height and forget the uneven climb. Lincoln's life included delays, defeats, and periods of uncertainty. He did not become great by avoiding discouragement. He continued through it. This makes the story more human and more useful. A life can move forward even when the path is not clear. He was not always at the center of national attention. For years, he was one politician among many, respected but not yet famous. Then, in the 1850s, the question of slavery's expansion into new territories pushed the nation toward crisis. Lincoln opposed the spread of slavery. He believed it contradicted the principles upon which the United States claimed to stand. He did not speak with the easy certainty of someone untouched by complexity. He spoke as a man trying to reason morally and constitutionally through a problem that was tearing the country apart. As the slavery crisis intensified, Lincoln's moral and political voice became clearer. He believed slavery was wrong, but he also operated within a constitutional system and a divided public. This tension made his path difficult. He was criticized by those who thought he moved too slowly, and by those who feared he moved too far. Leadership in a divided time often means being misunderstood from multiple directions. Lincoln endured this with a combination of patience, argument, and a deepening sense of purpose. In 1858, Lincoln ran for the United States Senate against Stephen A.R. Douglas, a powerful and well-known politician. Their debates drew attention across the country. Crowds gathered to hear them. The speeches were long by modern standards, and the issue was grave. Lincoln argued that the nation could not endure permanently half slave and half free. His words were not merely campaign language. They were a warning about the moral structure of the country. The Lincoln-Douglas debates gave the country a clearer view of him. Stephen Douglas was already nationally known. Lincoln was less famous, but he used the debates to frame the moral issue at the heart of the nation. His language was not always soothing because the subject was grave, but tonight we can hear it from a distance. Crowds in open air, banners, dust, people leaning in to listen, a tall man rising to speak, his voice carrying not charm alone, but conviction. He lost that Senate race, but losing did not erase what had happened. People remembered his arguments. They remembered the tall lawyer from Illinois who could speak plainly about the deepest conflict in American life. Sometimes a defeat becomes a doorway. Sometimes a lost election carries a voice farther than a quiet victory might have done. Let us return again to the safe room of the listener. The crowds are far away now. The debates are echoes. What remains is the image of a man learning how to speak truth in public without losing the plainness that made people trust him. The road continues, but softly. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was chosen as the Republican candidate for president. The country was deeply divided. Southern states feared that his election threatened the future of slavery. Northern voters were themselves divided in many ways, but Lincoln's message of stopping slavery's expansion and preserving the Union gained enough support. On November 6, 1860, he was elected President of the United States. Pause with that for a moment. The boy from the log cabin, the child with little formal schooling, the young man who borrowed books, split rails, told stories, studied law by himself, and built trust on the Illinois circuit, had been chosen for the highest office in the land. It is tempting to make this sound triumphant. In one sense it was. But for Lincoln, the victory opened not ease, but burden. Before he even took office, several southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. The nation was breaking apart. Lincoln traveled toward Washington under the shadow of danger. The ceremony of inauguration could not hide the crisis gathering around him. He became president in March 1861. In April, the Civil War began. Before leaving Springfield, Lincoln spoke to his neighbors in a farewell that was brief and deeply emotional. He had lived there for many years. He had married there. His children had been born there. He had worked there, laughed there, grieved there, and built his public life there. Now he was leaving for Washington, unsure when or whether he would return. The train waited. The crowd listened. Rain or damp weather hung in the air. His words were simple, but the moment was heavy. Imagine that farewell as a quiet scene. The station. The people gathered close. The tall man standing on the rear platform of the train. The town behind him, the future ahead of him. He asks for the help of Providence and says goodbye. Then the train begins to move. Wheels turn. Faces recede. Springfield becomes memory before he has even reached the next town. The journey to Washington was more than travel. It was a passage from local life into national sorrow. Along the way, crowds came to see him. Some cheered. Some watched in curiosity. Some worried. There were rumors of danger. Security concerns grew. The country felt unstable, as if the ground itself had begun to shift. Lincoln moved toward the Capitol carrying both the hope of his supporters and the anger of those who rejected his election. The Civil War was the central trial of Lincoln's presidency, and one of the darkest chapters in American history. It was a war between people of the same country, families and communities divided, armies moving across familiar fields, grief entering countless homes. More than 600,000 people died. Numbers like that can become too large for the mind. So for sleep, we will not turn them into scenes. We will let them remain solemn and distant, acknowledged but not dramatized. Instead, imagine Lincoln at night in the White House. The building is not only a symbol now. It is a place where a tired man reads reports, writes letters, meets generals, listens to petitioners, and waits for news that may bring relief or sorrow. His face grows more lined as the years pass. His shoulders carry decisions no person would wish to carry. He had a gift for humor, but even humor could not lift all of this weight. Still, he continued. Washington during the war was crowded, anxious, and full of movement. Soldiers passed through. Office seekers waited in halls. Families came with requests. Newspapers criticized. Politicians argued. Generals disappointed or demanded. The telegraph brought news quickly enough to keep worry alive. The White House was not a peaceful retreat. It was a place where the nation's fear walked in and out every day. Leadership in such a time was not a shining crown. It was wakefulness. It was staying with a problem when there was no easy answer. It was absorbing anger from all sides. It was trying to keep the Union together while gradually, painfully, moving the war toward a deeper moral purpose. Lincoln read military reports, visited soldiers, met with grieving families, responded to office seekers, considered the opinions of cabinet members, and wrote letters of astonishing tenderness and clarity. Some of his letters show his ability to speak to private grief, even while public disaster surrounded him. He understood that each soldier was not merely part of an army, but someone's son, brother, husband, father, or friend. For sleep, we need not march through battles. Instead, let us imagine the desk, papers piled high, a lamp burning late, the president's long hand holding a pen. Outside, Washington is dark. Inside, he reads news he does not want and writes words he hopes will help. This image carries the burden without overwhelming the listener. It shows war as weight, not spectacle. The White House also became a house of private grief. In 1862, Willie Lincoln died, and the loss struck Abraham and Mary with terrible force. The war outside and the sorrow inside seemed to meet in the same rooms. A president is still a father. A public figure is still a human being who walks past a child's empty place. Lincoln's sadness deepened, yet the work did not stop. This is one of the hardest truths in any life. Grief may arrive, and still mourning asks us to rise. Let us soften this now. We do not need to stay in the room of loss. Let the lamp remain. Let the papers rest. Let the father's sorrow be held gently by time. We return to the larger stream of the story, where sorrow and duty move together. Not because it is easy, but because history often asks people to continue while carrying what cannot be set down. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that enslaved people in the states then in rebellion were free. The proclamation did not end slavery everywhere at once, and its legal reach was shaped by the realities of war. But its meaning was immense. It changed the purpose of the war. The Union was no longer fighting only to preserve itself. It was now officially tied to the cause of emancipation. Think of the act not as a thunderclap, but as a document on a desk, words written, reviewed, signed, and sent into a wounded world. Paper can seem fragile, ink can seem quiet, but sometimes a page becomes a hinge in. History. Lincoln's hand. The hand that once split rails and turned borrowed pages, now signed words that carried the promise of freedom to millions. The Emancipation Proclamation came after long consideration, military timing, political pressure, moral conviction, and constitutional reasoning. Lincoln had to move in a way that could hold enough of the Union together to make freedom enforceable. This made him appear slow to some and radical to others. History often looks clearer after the fact than it felt to those living inside it. Lincoln lived inside the fog and still chose a direction. Enslaved people themselves had already been moving toward freedom, escaping to Union lines, forcing the question by their own courage. Abolitionists had long demanded action. Soldiers and citizens argued. The proclamation did not belong to Lincoln alone, but his signature gave the federal war effort a new moral form. Freedom became central. Let that word be quiet for a moment. Freedom, not as a slogan shouted in daylight, but as a word written on paper by lamplight, traveling outward to people who had been denied control over their own lives. The word was incomplete, contested, and difficult to realize. But it mattered. It opened a door history could not fully close again. Later that year, in November 1863, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where a terrible battle had been fought. A cemetery was being dedicated for the soldiers who had died there. Lincoln's speech was brief, only a few minutes, but brevity can hold great power when every word is chosen with care. He spoke of a nation conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He spoke of the dead and of the living task remaining. He spoke of a new birth of freedom. The Gettysburg Address remains one of the most famous speeches in American history because it does what Lincoln often did best. It takes something vast and painful and speaks of it plainly, solemnly, and beautifully. It does not shout. It does not decorate grief. It gives meaning without pretending that meaning removes sorrow. For a bedtime telling, this is important. The speech is not exciting in the shallow sense. It is steady. It is like a bell heard from far away. Imagine the scene softly, a November sky, a crowd gathered, fresh graves, cold air, Lincoln rising with a paper in hand. The words are brief. Some listeners may not fully understand at once that they have heard something lasting. That is often how great words behave. They do not always announce themselves in the moment. They settle into memory and grow there. The war continued. Lincoln was re-elected in 1864. By then, he looked profoundly worn, yet in his second inaugural address, delivered in March 1865, he did not speak with vengeance. He spoke with sadness, humility, and a desire for healing. The line most remembered asks for action with malice toward none, with charity for all. These words reveal the quality that makes Lincoln so enduring. He had reason to be bitter, he chose, at least in aspiration, charity. The second inaugural address is one of the most remarkable speeches in American political life because it refuses easy triumph. It does not pretend that one side was pure and the other simply monstrous. It reflects on judgment, responsibility, suffering, and the need to bind wounds. In the middle of victory, Lincoln spoke as a man aware that victory without mercy could become another kind of ruin. Imagine how tired a country must be to need such words. Imagine how tired the speaker must have been, and yet the words reach toward healing. This is the Lincoln we carry into the final part of the story. Not a man untouched by anger or pain, but a man trying to turn the nation toward mercy after unimaginable division. When the war ended in April 1865, bells rang. People celebrated. and hope stirred. The Union had survived. Slavery was moving toward final abolition through the 13th Amendment, which would be ratified later that year. Lincoln wanted to guide the country into reunion, to bring the South back without unnecessary cruelty, and to help define freedom after slavery. The hardest part seemed to be ending. A different, fragile work was about to begin. But hope was fragile. The questions ahead were immense. What would freedom mean in practice? How would the South return? How would formerly enslaved people secure rights, safety, land, work, citizenship, and dignity? Lincoln would not live to guide these questions. His death left the work unfinished. On April 14, 1865, Lincoln went with Mary to Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. during the play. John Wilkes Booth, an actor and Confederate sympathizer, entered the presidential box and shot him. Lincoln died the next morning, April 15th. He was 56 years old. We will keep this moment soft, not because it was not terrible, but because tonight's purpose is rest, not shock. Imagine instead the silence that followed. A nation, already exhausted by war, waking to the news that its leader was gone. Bells tolling, people standing in streets, soldiers and families, freed people and mourners, all trying to understand that the man who had carried the country through its storm would not be there for the morning after. His body was carried by train through cities and towns back toward Illinois. Crowds gathered along the route. Many had never met him. Many had criticized him. Many had loved him. Now they came to stand in quiet witness. The journey home became a national ritual of grief. The rail splitter, the lawyer, the storyteller, the president returned to the land that had shaped him. Picture that train moving slowly through the country. Not the hurried train of ambition now, but a funeral train. Fields pass, towns gather, hats are removed, faces look up, bells sound. People stand in the night with lanterns. Some are silent, some weep, some bring children, so they will remember, or so the adults can later say, "You were there when Lincoln passed homeward." The nation's sorrow moves by rail, and yet Lincoln's story did not end with his death. In some ways, that is when the candle became part of a larger light. People remembered the poverty of his beginnings, the hunger for learning, the honesty, the humor, the sorrow, the moral patience, the words that gave shape to national purpose. They made him into a symbol, as nations often do, but beneath the symbol remains a human being. And it is the human being who is most useful to us tonight. The human Lincoln reminds us that greatness can begin quietly. It can begin in a cabin with a borrowed book. It can begin with a mother's lesson about kindness. It can be strengthened by a stepmother's encouragement. It can grow through work that makes the body tired, through grief that deepens the heart, through reading that disciplines the mind, and through repeated choices to speak honestly even when easier words are available. He also reminds us that learning does not require perfect conditions. His education was irregular, but his attention was intense. He did not have many books, so he valued the books he found. He did not have endless paper, so he used whatever surface he could. He did not wait for life to become convenient before he began improving himself. He learned in fragments by firelight, in borrowed time, and those fragments became a foundation strong enough to hold enormous responsibility. This is a gentle lesson for anyone listening in the dark. You do not need to become a president. You do not need to carry a nation. But you can understand the comfort of steady growth. One page, one thought, one honest act, one patient day after another. Lives are often shaped less by grand declarations than by repeated quiet choices. Let us drift back now to the beginning, because sleep likes circles. See again the boy in the cabin? The page is open, the light trembles. Outside, the woods are dark. He is poor, and he does not know what is ahead. He does not know the debates, the White House, the war, the proclamations, the speeches, the statues. He only knows that he wants to read another line. He wants to understand. There is peace in this image because it is unfinished. The future has not arrived. The boy is simply there, present with the book, doing the next small thing. That is often all any life asks. Do the next small thing with care. Read the next line, mend the next fault. Tell the truth in the next conversation. Keep the inner candle lit a little longer as the night deepens around you. Let Lincoln become not a monument but a low light. A tall figure walking a muddy road. A lawyer riding the circuit under a wide sky. A father listening to children in the next room. A president writing late while the city sleeps. A tired man still trying to choose mercy. A voice saying, in the midst of division, that the work of freedom must continue. You do not have to hold the heavy parts now. Let them settle far away. Keep only the warmth of the story, the cabin, the book, the candle, the steady hand, the belief that a person may begin with very little and still become a vessel for great purpose. The belief that words, when honest and carefully chosen, can help a wounded world remember what it hopes to be. Still, before we let the story fade completely, let us linger in the rooms of Lincoln's life one more time. Not for more facts, but for atmosphere. The cabin room, where smoke darkens the rafters and a boy bends over a page. The Indiana clearing, where trees stand like walls and a young body learns endurance. The little school, where children repeat lessons aloud and a tall boy listens carefully. The borrowed book, carried home as though it were something alive. The store in New Salem, where talk moves in circles and reputation begins. The law office in Springfield, where papers gather and a lamp burns late. The White House room, where silence after midnight is never truly silent because the nation's grief waits on the desk. Each room leaves a kind of light. The cabin leaves the light of hunger for knowledge. The forest leaves the light of endurance. The school leaves the light of effort. The store leaves the light of community. The court leaves the light of reason. The family home leaves the light of tenderness. The White House leaves the light of responsibility. And over all of them, dim but steady, is the light of a person trying to become worthy of what life has asked. Lincoln's life is often told as an ascent from poverty to power. That is true, but it is not the whole truth. It is also a descent into deeper responsibility. The higher he rose, the heavier the burden became. The office did not free him from hardship. It gave him hardship on a national scale. Yet, the habits of the cabin remained useful. Patience, plainness, endurance, humor, thrift of words, respect for labor, and the ability to sit with difficulty without turning away. This is why the story feels so old and so close at the same time. Most of us will never face Lincoln's decisions, but we know something about doing the next task when tired. We know something about learning slowly. We know something about carrying private sadness while life continues. We know something about wanting words to be true. We know something about small lights in large darkness. The candle burns lower. The page grows dimmer. The boy's eyes are tired. Somewhere beyond the cabin walls, the forest is still. Tomorrow, there will be chores, wood to split, water to carry, work to do. But tonight, there is one more sentence, one more thought, one more quiet step toward a future no one can yet see. Years later, There will be a desk instead of a cabin floor. There will be a lamp instead of a small fire. There will be cabinet meetings instead of frontier chores. There will be generals, newspapers, petitions, grief, decisions, and speeches. Yet somewhere inside the president, the boy remains, the reader, the listener, the one who knows that words must be handled carefully because they can either cloud the world or clarify it. Perhaps that is the final comfort of Lincoln's story for sleep. It tells us that the small, patient things are not wasted. A child's reading is not wasted. A mother's lesson is not wasted. A stepmother's encouragement is not wasted. A joke told in a hard season is not wasted. A fair decision in a small case is not wasted. A sentence revised until it is true is not wasted. These things may travel farther than anyone can see. So now, let the facts loosen. Let the dates become stars far above the road. Let the speeches become low echoes. Let the sorrow be held by time. Let the candle return. The cabin is quiet. The boy reads. The page waits. The light trembles, but does not go out. And for now, that is enough. The road is still. The candle is small. The page is open. The story continues softly, even as you sleep.